Hi, I'm Dennis Keith. I'd like to ask you a question. Consider this. What would the world be like if every person on the planet were living out their uniqueness for the betterment of the world? What would the world be like if every person on the planet were living out their uniqueness for the betterment of the world? That's an awesome thought, isn't it? For me, it brings a smile to my face and joy to my heart and a sense of anticipation of what could be. Didn't always think that way. It wasn't even part of our vocabulary growing up. It wasn't part of what we did as a family. We were performance oriented, and you got rewarded for what you produced. If you failed to produce, there were consequences. There was not a whole lot of dreaming, not a whole lot of you're uniquely and wonderfully made. Now, I did have a couple of aunts, I must admit. My Aunt Edith and my Aunt Grace, they both believed that I should be and could be President of the United States. But again, they also believed that I looked good in black and I could sing like Johnny Cash, so you have to consider that. As time went on, I went to junior high, of course, and I served on the Students' Council. At the end of that year of ninth grade, as I was anticipating moving on to high school, Mr. Archibald, who'd headed up the Student Council as an advisor, called me into his office and said, "Hey, Dennis, I think you would be a really good student council leader over at the high school and would like you to consider running when you get there. In order to help you do that, one of the things I'd like you to do is I'd like to sponsor you and send you to student council camp at the University of Michigan this summer. And would you consider doing that?" And I went, whoa. I must tell you, even today, I get this gap in my chest when I think about that moment. I'm thinking, this guy believes in me. Nobody had ever really done that before. So I accepted. I went to the conference. It was a great conference. I was inspired and ready to go when I got back. And that's what I had to do. I had to go back. Like all conferences, you have to come down from the mountaintop to the people in the valley below. When I get back, there was this groundswell of negativity among all the guys at the school. There was a group in particular who took exception with the fact that I'd been selected and singled out to go to this student council camp. And they came up and they said, "Dennis, what makes you so special, man? Who do you think that you are that you get picked over any of us? You don't have anything in the tank more than we do, man. You've never done really anything. So, A, why were you selected? And two, why in the world would we ever vote for you? In fact, we're so against this idea, and we think this is just an ego trip for you. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that you don't get elected." I got to tell you, I was dumbstruck. I had no idea what to say. My self-awareness was such that I really didn't know how to process this. I'd heard Mr. Archibald a little bit, but I didn't have enough self-confidence to believe that I really had a place. And I really didn't know how to process my emotions to their negativity, and I didn't know how to feel their negativity in dealing with how they were approaching me. And my optimism went out the window. I began to believe what they were saying. Maybe I don't have anything to offer. Maybe I got no place at the table here. And I backed off and backed off and backed off. The time the election came, I lost. And I didn't get back into politics while I was in high school. When I went to college, I was sitting across a guy named Terry, and Terry asked me, he said, "Dennis, have you ever considered that you are uniquely and wonderfully made? That God has a plan for your life?" And I just sort of laughed at him and I said, "Oh man, I've heard this story before and I don't believe it." But we talked about it for nearly a half a day, back and forth. And at the end of that, Terry convinced me that that concept was truly true. And so I embraced it, began to try to work it out in my life, to understand how I was uniquely made and what kind of contribution I could make to the world around me. Then I began to fashion a life of how to help others do that as well. I chose a life of going into the ministry. I eventually ended up on a staff at a church. I was doing my job. I was doing tasks that were making a difference, it seemed like. And one day, the senior pastor called me and he says, "Dennis," he says, "I don't think you're going to make it in this ministry." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you don't have any mercy." I said, What's mercy got to do with ministry?" I said, "I'm doing the job you asked me to do. What's the deal here?" He said, "Well, you got to have mercy. You got to have empathy for people." Well, I put that in my back pocket, continued to do my job. Eventually said, "Well, I think the solution is to go to graduate school." So I went to graduate school. And now, while I was at seminary, one of the things that uniquely happened was I got enrolled in a life curriculum of developing mercy and empathy. My youngest daughter was born with a heart defect, and my wife contracted a muscle debilitating disease. And I began to learn mercy. I began to learn humility. I began to learn empathy. Empathy that was expressed by people around me toward us and toward our family. I began to develop a sensitivity that I had never experienced before. So I continued through seminary and after that to begin working of honing those skills. But I would sort of hack around here and there trying to understand it and trying to put it into place. I knew that people needed to be valued and they were valuable. I tried to do that in my life. But to be honest, it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I got exposed to some concepts by a group called 6 Seconds. And 6 Seconds had two key cornerstones for me, at least. One was called a life map, and it highlighted that it was important to know yourself, to choose yourself, and to give yourself away. But in order to do that, you did need to have the tools of understanding what they called 9 competencies of emotional intelligence. That dealt with self-awareness and processing, navigating one's emotions, all the way down to what's called the noble goal. And that's where I developed mine, to say succinctly that it is to unleash uniqueness while maintaining my own for the betterment of the world. Now, let me ask you this question as we wrap up. I'd like you to consider a little project if you choose to accept it. Could you take a moment to just think about someone that you could, in the next couple of days, come alongside and help them tap into their uniqueness and help them express it in some unique way? Who might that be? If you're willing to do that, it'll make a world of difference and will move a step closer toward the people on this planet uniquely unleashing their uniqueness for the betterment of the world. Thanks for listening.